All right, everybody, we wanted to just welcome you back to our fifth and final Lunch and Learn for our October Domestic Violence Awareness Series. Today, we are so lucky to have a couple of our law enforcement partners on with us today, along with our Executive Director, Darlene Jones. Darlene, can you just take a minute and introduce yourself, please?
Hi. Well, as Melissa said, I'm Darlene Jones, the Executive Director of the Violence Prevention Center. The Violence Prevention Center has been around for over 43 years. And out of those whole 43 years, our sole mission has been to provide services to victims of domestic violence. We provide 24-hour hotline, an emergency shelter for adults and children, counseling program for adults and children, a legal advocacy program to assist with getting orders of protection, understanding what your rights are, and a prevention and education program. My role as the executive director is to oversee the operations of the agency so that we can continue to provide these programs, these services.
Thanks, Darlene. So today we are going to spend a little bit of time talking to a couple of the people we work with regularly in law enforcement. First, we have Chief Procise with Waterloo. Chief, can you tell us a little bit about what you do in the area?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name's Jeff Procise. I'm the Chief of Police at Waterloo. I've been in law enforcement for about 20 years, and I was promoted to chief last year. And about that time, a little bit before, we started with this multidisciplinary team and this offender-focused program. And I've been involved with it since the beginning, and I'm glad to be involved with it. And, you know, like my main role as the chief is to, you know, make sure that the officers have training and that up-to-date training on domestic violence and with this new program. And you know, make sure that our policies and procedures are followed within the program. So that's that. I feel like that's my main role, and to keep focused on the program and keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Thanks, Chief. And then we also have with us Detective Sergeant Heine with Columbia Police Department. And can you talk to us a little bit about your role with the MDT team and as partners with the Violence Prevention Center?
Sure. I lead our investigative division at the Columbia Police Department, and so a lot of my cases are involving investigating these kinds of crimes for the domestic. I've also been in the offender focused initiative program from the ground up, and I'm really proud of that program, and I think it's really going to help us. But I also, part of my job is, you know, the officers, they'll go out there on the scene and they will meet with a victim and the offender, and I also oversee how they are going towards and working with the victim. Many times I will take over their spot eventually and interview the victims on a recorded line or things like that. So I make sure that the officers are following their policies and guidelines.
That's really awesome. So we use a lot of code words and short names around here, but we've talked about the MDT team quite a bit. Darlene, can you tell us a little bit about what that is, what it stands for, and how it works to help survivors?
Sure. Well, I think Jeff's the one who said MDT stands for Multidisciplinary Team. And basically, it is designed to improve collaboration of services for victims of domestic violence at 3 different levels. The first level, first and foremost, is safety first. There was a time safety for victims of domestic violence was providing shelter for them and their children, but that really isn't enough. So what the multidisciplinary team does, they encircle the individuals and provide a deeper level of security with law protection. Law enforcement protection is one, court protection, and linking the individuals with various community resources. And working as a team, our services, our focus, it's stronger, and we're able to do more for the victims. The second level is providing offender accountability, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But basically, it's holding the offenders more accountable. It's an opportunity for law enforcement to go in and gather more evidence at the scene so that they have more information to actually do a prosecution. And then they monitor, they assess the offender following the conviction. And the third level of service that the MDT focuses on is community services, whether it's working with different community resources or providing prevention and education in the community, providing trainings to the community, and that includes trainings to the police officers, and attending community events, which gives us an opportunity to bring awareness to the community about domestic violence.
That's great. So I think a lot of times, you know, some of the purpose of these series of Lunch and Learns is to kind of do some myth busting and kind of just put some truths out there that people don't necessarily believe. And a lot of times people believe that agencies like ours and law enforcement can sometimes be at odds, or we don't really work, you know, in synchronous with each other. And so this MDT team really helps to combat that. Do you guys, can you guys offer any reasons why, you know, why is this kind of model so successful in making sure we're all kind of in sync and serving survivors the best?
Yep. Melissa, if I could go ahead and talk about that. I when I was thinking about this Lunch and Learn, you know, thinking back to my law enforcement career, and, you know, 15, 20 years ago, if we had a domestic situation, we would go and handle the situation as best as we could based on the training that we had, and we would, you know, send a fax to the violence prevention office, and hopefully they would get help that way. But we never, at that point, it seemed like we were kind of disconnected from the call at that point, like it was over, and then we moved on to something else. I feel like now with this new program, you know, because we have someone from on this MDT team, you know, you have state's attorney's office, you have each police officer, the violence prevention office, you know, we're all on the same page. We all deal with the same training. We know what the state's attorney's office wants. We know what the violence prevention office, we know what they can do. We know how they can help the survivor. So I think it's evolved into something much better, you know, where we can really help the survivor and focus on the offender also to just better serve the community.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that overall, you know, when we serve survivors better, like we do serve the community better. We want survivors coming forward, feeling comfortable, knowing that they can get help no matter who they contact first, you know, which I think is great. And so, you know, you mentioned a little bit of training. I don't know, you know, I know that we have increased the training that officers receive pretty extensively. Can somebody tell us just about how that helps when you're maybe dealing with a domestic situation?
Well, and I mean, Carla, if you let me go real quick, I mean, because I was just, when you said that, I was thinking about one of the latest trainings that we had, and it was, you know, one of the parts of that focused on strangulation within domestic violence, and you know, it was a really good training for all of us because it opened our eyes that, hey, this happens more than what we knew before, and it gave us specific things. You know, that training helped us look for specific things and ask specific questions to the survivor of the domestic violence. You know, when we're there, like, you know, physical signs, symptoms, you know, did they have, you know, difficulty breathing, soreness, and all these different things that we can ask that can really help us focus on that. And I think prior to that, I think we might have overlooked some of those cases just because of not having that training. So this new training really helped us focus on that part of a domestic violence situation.
Awesome.
Carla, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think the training has really helped us understand the cycle of violence that the survivors go through on a daily basis. And it also helped us understand that the offenders use their power and control over the survivors, and what we can do to help the survivors break that cycle. And also, one big thing that we learned about was trauma. And when we interview our victim or our survivors, before, it was really hard to, sometimes they would just have an inability to speak. They would shut down. And many times we just didn't really understand why. But now we understand that trauma can cause so much of this. And so knowing that, we can take our time with our survivors and we can help them, walk them through all this. And I think it helps them gain trust in us when we understand kind of where they're coming from. So the training has been huge. And also, the state's attorney, he, like Chief said, he's given us a list of things that we need to do to make sure that our cases are solid. And he wants to know everything about that scene. And now we know exactly what he needs, be it if the kids were present, what eyewitnesses are there. We need to be getting any kind of evidence, pictures of any injuries, any kind of damage to property, things like that. These are all the things that he's looking for, and he's been great in helping us to be able to build these cases.
Yeah.
So,
I think the trainings, being a police officer is a difficult job, and a lot of times you go back to the same place because of domestic violence repeatedly. And if you don't have an understanding of how domestic violence, the layers of it, and why somebody might be staying, it's easy to be a little calloused as to, well, here we go again, same place, same person, and to get irritated by it. But the trainings help police officers understand there's many different reasons that people stay in a situation. And although we don't have time to cover all those reasons here, just having that understanding makes a difference, I think, for police officers to know how to approach an individual. And you were talking about the trauma. Even part of the training talks about there's truly a chemical change in the brain that when you first ask somebody who's been traumatized what happened, or what the details were, they either don't know or they give the wrong information. But 2 days later they might have different information, but it's because the information's coming back to them. It's not because they're lying. So again, without that training, it's easy for the victim to fall through the cracks, because it's like, yeah, she's changed her story 3 times. So it's been really a positive thing to work so closely with the police officers and the state's attorney's office.
yeah, you're exactly right. The training has taught us a lot about trauma, and now we know how to trigger their memory different ways. Maybe it might be not be what you heard, it might be what you smelled, it might be what
Yeah.
all these different senses that we're trying to bring alive to help them remember what occurred. And so the training has really been helpful.
That's really awesome. I'm so glad to hear it. When we talk a lot to community members and things like that, we hear a lot of people say things like, this is not happening in my town, or, these are problems for bigger cities and bigger towns. And that's just one myth we know not to be true, right? Because we know we serve survivors from everything. But is there, what can we do? How does this team help us fight isolation for survivors? If you're in a town that you're hearing those things, and how does this team help us come forward?
Domestic violence occurs everywhere in all walks of life. It doesn't matter race, socioeconomic status, age, or anything. So I think the first thing that we have to remember is the police are coming in. We're the first ones that are interacting with the survivors, okay? And it's huge how we approach them, and it's huge how we handle these kinds of cases. We have to walk them through slowly. Like I said, we have to take time with them. They have to understand that this is not their fault. And so I feel like if they learn to trust us in those ways, that keeps them from feeling like they're isolated. And then the second way, our team, we're all working together. We're all communicating together so much better than we used to. Like Chief said, we used to fax a form off to the domestic violence team, and that was the last. Well, I hope someone took care of that. Now we all communicate so well together, and we're getting them the things that they need to get on their own again. Maybe it be counseling. We work on getting them the counseling they need, or it might be housing that they may need to, or it might be some kind of skills that they need for to start off on a new job, to get on their own again. So all of these things, we're all working very much together to help them gain control of their lives. Many times they never had that. They haven't had that for years and years and years, and that's what we do. We work together to help them do that.
I think in response to that question as well, sometimes it's easy if people do have the attitude that doesn't happen in our town. It's easy to say they're in denial, but probably more than that, they just really are unaware, and that's a community that would benefit from even more of teams like what we have. Even teachers, like right now with COVID, the kids aren't in school the way they are doing Zoom meetings. It's difficult for teachers to see something's going on with that child, or that child is super withdrawn, maybe even has bruises, is not sleeping at night, so they're sleeping during class. The things that we can usually work with teachers on that's a lot of the different ways that help does happen, is when the teachers call help in. So if there's a community that's saying it's not happening in our community, that's a community we need to work with police officers more, the schools, the community as a whole, educating the community about what domestic violence even is. So many people don't even really understand what domestic violence is. And if you are in it and you don't understand, how are you ever going to get out of it? Because you don't understand that you have a right not to be hurt. You have a right not to be emotionally abused. So I think that it's easy to say they're in denial, but I think it's just lack of understanding and education.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk about is that this, from working with this MDT team, we've brought about this really awesome initiative for the county called the Offender Focused Initiative. Darlene, can you tell us a little bit about what it is, what it isn't, those kind of things?
Sure. This is an initiative that's fairly new. I think there's only a couple places in the states that's actually implemented this. More people are starting to look at it closer, but it's an opportunity. Instead of a police officer goes to a home and deals with whatever is happening in that home abuse-wise, and then link the individual with us, they're taking it deeper than that. In an effort to reduce recidivism of that abuser continuing to abuse, they're developing a system where it's A through D. A is when they're working with people that were arrested, and D is when there was not an arrest made, but they're letting them know we have a new program and you are on notice. We're going to be paying attention to what you're doing. We're going to have conversations in our meetings as to what has happened now, and if we see anything else. I think B is where there's actually a group meeting of the offenders they have not been prosecuted yet or arrested yet, but they're that level away from it. And the intensity, and C is when an investigator is at the home within 48 hours delivering a letter that now the first one was verbal warning. The second one is you have been put on written notice. We are paying attention. And so it's really to let them know they didn't just get by with it just because the police officer came, everything's calmed down. No, the police are still going to very much be involved and pay attention. And that's one of the things that our MDT in Monroe County is focusing on.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So a lot of times when we think about domestic violence, like the onus always kind of rests on the victim, or on the survivor. And this is just a nice kind of way to pivot that a little bit and let the offender know that they have some responsibility in this and that we're paying attention, which is pretty cool, frankly.
Yeah, not only does it take the heaviness off of the victim, it is now in the offender's hands because the police are addressing that offender. It's so intimidating for somebody who has been abused to really push it. They might push it in the moment while they're in that crisis, but fear or threats, a lot of different things prevent them from continuing to push the pin or the dial or whatever. But knowing that the police have stepped in now, so even though the victim might be standing back a little bit, the police are not going to, and that takes some of that heat off of that individual.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. So what are we, I know this program is brand new and that, the pandemic has put a pin in some things, but what kind of things are we expecting out of this initiative? What do we think it's going to do overall for our communities?
Well, and what Darlene was saying, I'm just going to go back on that a little bit. Where the survivor or victim was standing back and not pushing it because they know as soon as we leave, that person that was on the other end of that violence is going to possibly hurt them again or do something else. So I just wanted to give that from our law enforcement side. We were in that too, where we would go and we know once we leave, we were put in this position of like, we may not be able to help this person, but now we are able to help because we're not saying, hey, what do you want to do? We're leading the charge saying, here's what we're going to do from law enforcement side. And it kind of relieves that survivor from having to say that, so I just wanted to mention that. But, for this program, I think obviously we want to decrease the amount of domestic violence in our community and have awareness, focusing on the offender, making them accountable for their actions. We want more community involvement, like Darlene was saying, with education. I think that's a huge thing. It could be just that people don't.
Oh,
That's
Sorry.
okay.
you're good.
Oh, we lost you again.
There we go.
Okay, sorry.
You're good now.
So, we just want community involvement, and we want people to be involved. And if they hear of, even a neighbor, hey, sometimes a neighbor will say, oh, I didn't feel it was my place to call police, well, we want them to call us, and that's what we want. We want to lower the amount of domestic violence in our community and make it safe for everyone.
Yeah. The difference is with the police officer, when they leave, the police are still involved, and that's intimidating. And that intimidation is what we're hoping will reduce recidivism, because it's not behind closed doors anymore. Even though the incident is over and the door has closed, the police are still very much involved. And so the offender knows that. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, that we're coming back in. Usually we leave and that's all that it is. Now we're coming back. And it's not, not within an hour. We're coming back 24, 48 hours later, and we're checking in on everything and letting them know, hey, we're watching you. We've got a watch list, and we're going to be, if we have any more calls out here, be it through the community or neighbors or anybody see this, well, we have you, we're watching you. So it's really, really good to be able to come back into the home 24 hours later and let that survivor know that, hey, we're still here for you. You're not alone. We're here.
That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
That is such a big deal. And so, you know, we're kind of wrapping up in our last few minutes here, and I don't think we could kind of get off the call without talking about the way that COVID or the pandemic is currently impacting services in some of our communities. And we've talked about that all month long, and that, you know, the Violence Prevention Center is always here and we're operating. So not to let a pandemic stand in the way of reaching out for help. But what are you guys seeing as far as the way you're interacting with survivors, or survivors are ready to call, based on the pandemic currently?
Well, the pandemic is always a concern for the rise of domestic violence. I mean, you have a lot of stressors that are going on now that, you know, wouldn't be normal. You have unemployment, you have reduced income. You know, many parents are now staying home with their kids because they are going to school, you know, viral, or what do you call it? But
Online.
also, yeah, there you go. And there's limited social support. So we understand that, but we are really not doing, we're just handling our cases as we always have. There's always going to be ongoing support for our survivors, and we will continue to respond to all of our domestic violence calls just as we always have.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that, you know, there are some things that are harder to go about, maybe counseling. You may have to do like Zoom meetings instead of you know, in-person counseling and things like that. But we are always there for them to help them through this process.
Yeah, I think that is the biggest drive home that we want to say before we head out today, is that if you are in need of help, we want you to reach out, whether it's calling our hotline, calling your local police department. Either way, we're all here for you, and we are just working together to just end domestic violence. As we wrap up, does anybody have anything that I may have forgot, or that you really wanted to make sure that we said today? No?
I would like to say that typically MDTs have grant funding, and that's what helps bring these teams together. Monroe County, we don't have that grant funding. And so all the entities that are involved, the state's attorney's office, the different police departments, they're doing it because they want to do it. They want to make a change. And to me, that says so much about the community. And I have so much respect for everything that law enforcement's doing there. They really care. It's obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to speak, you know, for the survivors, we don't want them to think that they're alone. You know, we're here, we have trust in them. We're going to help them however we can. That's what the MBT team was created for. So I just wanted to get that out there, that, you know, we want to help, and we're here to help, and we'll help you out any way we can. So.
And I guess the last thing I want to say is that continued support from our community is so very important. And if you see any kind of abuse, like Chief Procyse was saying, please call us. Even if you have an uneasy feeling, you know, about a neighbor, you're hearing some yelling, arguing, you know, thumping going on, you don't know what's going on, call us, because you never know whose life you might save by doing that.
And they can be anonymous, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't want their name attached to their neighbor, a call that was made. They can be anonymous, and we'll respect that also.
I think that is probably the best note to end on. So with that, guys, have a great day, and thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right.
Oh.
So.
Sorry, wait, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah.